Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about risk and compliance and what finance leaders can expect in 2025, which is somehow or other just around the corner. 2024, of course, as all of you will know and will have experienced, has been another, pretty turbulent year with one thing and another, from geopolitical events, political instability, and global sourcing risks, for example. So it's been a kind of time for CFOs to consider very careful risk management strategies. And to be successful, organizations must really adopt those risk management strategies to cope with those changing conditions. So I'm absolutely delighted this morning to be joined by three experts in their field. And perhaps when you hear your name, you can just give a little wave, see who you are. So Matt Hardacre, who is the delivery director of Barker's, and he's going to share his experience of how companies leveraging tech mitigates some of that supply chain risk that we've just been talking about. And then we have Shane Casey of Coupa, and he's going to talk about some of the key features of Coupa that can help CFOs and CPOs control and report. And last but not least, we have Steve Schools, who'll share his first-hand experience of working with Barker's and Coupa at Vanquis Banking Group to enhance some of those efficiencies and compliance details that we're going to be talking about during the course of this webinar. So just a little bit of clarification as well. I mean, most of you probably on the webinar this morning will have heard of Coupa, but perhaps some of you are unfamiliar with Barker's and who they are. So Barker's are a global consultancy that alongside Coupa work in collaboration with clients, helping to shape solutions to businesses' needs to help drive some of that value that they need. And ultimately, you can have the best solution in the world, but without the right kind of implementation partner, you're never going to have the kind of success that you need. So that's to give some kind of context to the story that we're going to be sharing today. So you do have the opportunity to ask questions at any point during the webinar. And if you have a look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a little chat function there. So at any point, as I say in the webinar, just put any questions that you might have in that chat function, and we'll address them at the end. And do make sure you ask those questions, because as I say, we've got those three experts in their field with us today, and I'm sure they want to be put through their paces. So ask them a few good questions. So we are, as I said, talking about finance and procurement transformation. It's been a key theme throughout this year, and will continue to shape some of those strategies for us into 2025. So perhaps first, Steve, if I come to you, digital transformation is top of mind for many organizations, especially as they face some of those mounting external pressures that we talked about just at the opening just now. From your experience at Vanquis Banking Group, what are the key initiatives in finance and procurement been? And do you expect some of those initiatives to change as we go into 2025?
Good morning. So I think that many companies are facing similar issues. So if I give a little bit of background to the Vanquis Banking Group, so we've been established in 1880. It's grown in many forms through many decades. But in the 80s and 90s and noughties, it was evolved into 5 separately trading companies with 5 separate MDs, 5 P&Ls, 5 separate IT infrastructures, and they all formed part of the group. This meant that literally that we had a group that created revenue together, but they were all very separate, and we didn't collaborate very well. This as a strategy wasn't very good. So, what I can resonate with other companies, I can assume, was the thing that we needed in what we recognized in 2019, 2020, was that we needed to be more cost effective. We needed to be faster with MI across the group. we needed to reduce our supplier risk in a more as the regulations became more regulated in the banking environment. And basically that we needed systems to be able to help us pull that information together to create faster and robust strategies. What we recognized is that we needed a procurement strategy and also a finance strategy, which we wanted to run in parallel so that we could implement systems that talk to each other and that we get a holistic view of all the spend and suppliers and various other bits of MI that would fall within the group and within those 5 divisions.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's very difficult to get any kind of control on your processing if all of those systems remain very, very disparate. So I can totally understand why you've gone through that process, and we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty of the benefits of that as we go through the conversation today. But it makes absolute sense that you'd want to gain better visibility and control of those processes, as you say. Matt, I understand that Barker's ran a survey recently, and that was aimed at obviously finance and procurement professionals, which explored the levels of confidence in the economy and attitudes towards risk. Maybe you can just talk to us a little bit about that survey and expand on it, and please, and what you found as well within that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ellen. Morning, everyone. Our procurement digital survey was directed at C-suite procurement and risk leaders, and slightly different to the typical surveys that are sent. We're really interested in what the sentiment in the market was. We really want to feel how people are feeling and what's on their mind, what's keeping them up at night. And the survey results were interesting and a little bit concerning. I think what we're seeing across the piece is risk conceptually is definitely a priority for procurement organisations. They're owning, in the main, risk management, but they aren't really seen as the champion or the formal owner of it. In fact, over half of the respondents in the survey just felt risk management as a concept wasn't an organisational priority that was being taken seriously. Maybe it's difficulty in a case, creating a case for change. Maybe they don't know how to do it in that literal application of risk management. But yeah, very, very concerning themes. And I think what we concluded with this from the results of the survey, a lot of this wraps up into transformation. And I think we feel that transformation is often an overused moniker in the procurement community. And I think we're seeing procurement are still having to constantly transform, almost to the extent that procurement are struggling to make their post-transformation operating models really stick. That's leading to a perception of false starts, maybe underwhelming outcomes. And procurement teams seem to almost have to constantly keep up with this theme of transformation without any real meaningful outcomes. It's resulting in largely an academic outcome that's not offering a practical way of working that the business can align to. And I think later on into the session, we'll talk about some of the clients who've been really successful in that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right. We do use transformation as a term quite a lot. I mean, we use it in our finance conversations as well as you're saying, within procurement as well. And I think as a concept, it sometimes can be quite difficult to grasp, or maybe it's almost like I was talking about this the other day with someone. It can be almost a little bit like wallpaper. You think you understand it, but actually the person on the other side of that conversation, their concept of transformation might be quite different to yours. So I think you do actually have to be quite careful in the language that you use and make sure that people properly understand what it is that you're talking about. Well, thanks for sharing some of those results of that survey, and that's must be quite interesting. I love going through surveys myself. You can get some really good information from what's really going on with in people's organisations. So with that showing that digitization is a top priority, maybe you could talk about some of those examples that you mentioned just then, and see how they have transformed their finance and procurement functions.
Yeah, absolutely. The first client I want to talk about is an organisation who's in the renewable energy sector. So highly competitive market, highly regulated, and margins are extremely tight. This client had a number of problems. Firstly, they had a very, very ambitious growth and construction plan in that regulated and tight margin market that I've also talked about, but they were also VC backed. So there was a sense of impatience, high expectations, which were really driving the urgency and timescales of that investment program. As a business, they were very, very young. They had a decentralized procurement approach. And I think the procurement approach up to then, prior to the digital transformation that me and my team led, was very, very tactical. It was very much have money, will spend. But on the flip side, they didn't have a desire to have a centralized procurement team, as we've seen in Steve's business. I think the real differentiator and why that customer was incredibly successful was their vision for technology was absolutely adopted from day one. In spite of all the decentralized approaches and the sort of informal ways of working, they were absolutely married to the fact and the idea that technology could be leveraged through the entire supply chain and how they go out to market. This vision allowed them to manage costs, manage their funding expectations, adopt those cost management practices at a local level, so people still feel like they have the freedom of choice and the freedom to run their P&L, but amongst prescribed limits. So a great success. The second client I just wanted to mention briefly was our logistics client. They had a slightly different problem. Very established business, a market leading business, and the market post-COVID had changed around them. So they had a very, very high cost to serve, very, very disgruntled customer base because their customer service function hadn't kept pace. So they embarked on a whole of business transformation that really looked to relabel procurement and finance as a function to support sales. They were trying to transform those functions from a silo reporting function, trying to influence spend rather than direct it and act strategically, into this strategic organization that was all there to contribute to revenue. So the digital transformation we led them on was a success because of the very, very clear leadership that business displayed. They acted, and we talk about this internally, like a military unit. Very, very clear direction, very, very aligned teams, and the group of people who were working truly with each other. Combine that with the class-leading tech, it was a fantastic result.
I mean, you can clearly, you can hear the passion about those projects in your voice when you're talking about them, and I think that really comes to bear, and I think that makes a big difference when you're talking about the success of a project. Having that passion. It sounds like the teams themselves really have that vision, and if you're working with people who've got that vision, understand the tech, and have that strategy to go forward, and I say almost like a military strategy, you can see that they really want to, and perhaps it's hungry for that success as well. So thanks for sharing those stories with us today. It's great to hear. Shane, if I could come to you next, is that something that resonates with you, that those kind of stories that Matt's been talking about, and some of the things that Steve's been talking about as well? How does Cooper play a role in this kind of changing risk management landscape that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, it absolutely resonates. And when we look at risk management, I think risk comes in various forms. So we have risky or fraudulent spend. We have a lack of purchasing control or upfront approvals around purchasing. We have risk through errors. So if we look at manual tasks like keying in invoices, and then you have supply chain risk. Understanding your suppliers from a risk perspective. So Coupa's role is really starts by helping businesses get control around their spend. So making it easy for people to come in and purchase, but doing it in a controlled way. And what that does is it results in better spend visibility, and with that, more accurate reporting and better forecasting, so better decision making. We are also, by putting the control in place around the purchase order, allowing us to automate invoice processing, because what we do is pre-code and pre-approve the purchase order. And that eliminates the need to manually match an invoice with a PO or have to key in invoice details like a GL code. So you're reducing risk also at the invoice level. And then on top of that, Coupa provides that visibility into both your supplier risk and performance. So really giving customers a holistic view of their supplier base in terms of risk and performance.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, I mean, I think, just hearing you speak there, you're talking about reducing risk and making better informed decisions. It makes a huge difference when you're being faced with some of the issues we talked about right at the start of the webinar, some of those, instabilities, and also, reducing some of those manual errors as well, because, try as you might, if you work in a quite high manual environment, it's very, very difficult to reduce those errors down. So thanks for that. Maybe Steve, if I ask you about supply chain risk management, I mean, that's emerged as a key consideration in the survey. How has Vanquis Banking Group integrated that risk management into its broader transformation strategy? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what technology has played in that role as well, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, banks have always been regulated. It was the FSA, then it was the FCA and PRA. The regulators have become more savvy to the effects of supply chains on the banks. They're making sure that banks are accountable for their suppliers and their supply chains. And so, we've heard of failures in, suppliers before. TSB had that IT issue with regards to the cash machines, and they got heavily fined for that. So the regulators have become more aware that actually customers can be directly affected by the bank, but it isn't the bank. Well, technically, it's not the bank's fault because it's a supplier that's failed. But the regulator's now saying, the bank, you can't just say, oh no, it wasn't us, it's them. You are now being held accountable. And those regulations are getting more stringent year on year, and have done for the past 20, 30 years. And so it's vital that as a bank today and tomorrow, that you know all of your suppliers, and that you have visibility of your supply base and your supply chains, because what you need to be able to do is to try and predict supplier issues, mitigate those supplier issues, and even prevent supplier issues before they happen by planning for scenarios that potentially could happen, and not just business continuity, but also operational resilience, and that basically could affect any bank, or i.e. for me, it's Vanquis. And so whatever happens with our suppliers, and that our customers are protected, and that they don't see a detriment in their service. So the approach I took for that was to be able to, you've got to be able to see all of your suppliers. And I alluded to earlier to say, we had 5 different supply bases, 5 different sets of ledgers, and it was very hard to find out where all these suppliers were. But that's point 1, right? Find out, where are we spending? Get your full supplier list. Once you've got the supplier list, then we took an approach to tier them into different categories, from critical to transactional, and we took a 5-tiered approach. Many different people will tier them differently, but we took a 5-tiered approach here, and we based that on customer impact, regulatory impact, data information security or data protection impacts, CSR impact. Obviously, got to take those things into account. And what we've done then is, once we've tiered those, then we've addressed our TPRM framework to create a minimum standard of due diligence and oversight for each of those suppliers in each of those categories. And once you have those tiers, then you can tailor your ongoing assessments, your ongoing due diligence, and the frequency of the service reviews, and even the topics within those service reviews, to reflect the criticality and the services of those suppliers. In order to do that, we have a few tools to do the tiering. We use a quite a complicated Excel-based formula, which we're trying to digitize into a TPRM module that we're trying to implement at the moment with RiskConnect. But we also use RiskConnect as our enterprise risk framework, where we log all of our supply risks and whatnot. We use a company called CreditSafe that does all of our daily financial health checks, so that sends us daily reports on our top 4 tier suppliers, and if there's any movement of more than 20% of the credit score, good, bad, then we get notification, or if it goes below a certain threshold. So then we can also immediately then bounce on the supplier to say what's happening here. Please, give us that bit more foresight. And finally, obviously, we use Coupa, and we use that as our contracts repository. So we have all of our contracts stored within the contracts repository. So if it gets to the point where we need to be looking at SLAs or KPIs, or even if it's even getting into a more severe scenario, then we've got the contract at a few clicks of a button.
Well, sounds like you're doing some fantastic stuff, and comes back ultimately to gaining true visibility of your supplier base and maximizing your control, because I think all of the things that we've been talking about so far in the conversation today, you need that kind of visibility and control in order to maximize your efficiencies and enable your organization to have growth. And you need to have you need to know your suppliers in order to be proactive if anything's going wrong within that supplier base.
And I think is the hardest thing at the moment is what is a challenge for not just us. I can imagine it's a challenge for nearly every supplier, for every person, is mapping your 4th and 5th and 6th suppliers. So Microsoft just had that massive outage where basically it wasn't them, it was their third party. So everybody got affected by this tiny little supplier, but massively affected half the globe. So it's mapping your 4th parties, and how do you do due diligence on those, and making sure that you've got visibility of those supply chains.
Yeah, and no surprises, lurking there within your supply chain, which can rocket, as you say, even if they're smaller suppliers to you. Shane, maybe coming back to you, given that risk management and supplier health are critical components to procurement and finance transformation, what specific functionalities in Coupa help those organizations to better manage that risk?
Yeah, Steve touched on a couple of points there. He mentioned, contracts and visibility into your contracts and being able to manage them. That's definitely one element of it. In terms of risk management and supplier health, I would say at the most fundamental level, in terms of how Coupa helps, it starts with onboarding controls and doing all the due diligence when it comes to supplier onboarding. And then once you've got your suppliers onboarded, well, you want to ensure that you're staying up to date with supplier information. So it could be certificates like insurance and ISO certificates, tracking those certificates, making sure that you're not missing expiries, and that you have all that information up to date. And then if we go a bit wider, looking at your supplier risk and performance on top of that. So these are two areas that are often operated in silos, because you have risk management, risk assessments happening perhaps on a quarterly basis, and then you have supplier performance happening elsewhere, where you're processing invoices, you're receiving purchase orders and whatnot. So Coupa takes a holistic approach to both risk and performance. We offer things like out-of-the-box risk feeds for financial scores, news sentiments, but also we allow customers to bring their own risk feed into Coupa. So Steve mentioned CreditSafe there, right? You can bring, if you have subscriptions for these third-party solutions, bring those feeds into Coupa so you get a holistic view of risk. Coupa also handles third-party supplier risk. So yeah, Steve mentioned it also. So again, you have all of that risk in one place. So that's your risk, but then also looking at your performance. So okay, because it's a holistic platform where you're managing you're raising purchase orders, you're receiving invoices, we can also see what does the transactional data look like. For example, are your suppliers paying their invoices on time? So you get that holistic view of risk and performance. And then it's about, okay, we identify a risky supplier, and we need to take action on that risk. So within Coupa, we'll highlight a change in risk behavior, but also prescribe recommendations on how you might act on that risk, such as shifting spend to a non-risky supplier or putting a risky supplier on hold.
Yeah, and again, it's putting that extra layer of control and visibility in place, isn't it, that helps organisations make better decisions for themselves, and I guess having that risk and performance in one place makes a big difference for people to be able to gain that information easily. Matt, I mean, what do you think? I mean, how do you think that this helps finance leaders with their growth and risk strategies?
Absolutely, thanks, Alan. I think the key thing here is we're now moving into a space as where data, risk, the tracking of all these processes, underlying ways of working is simple and accessible for the first time. Finance leaders can now have a direct and unified view of how suppliers are being assessed, how they're being monitored, either at the point of onboarding or through the life cycle of the supplier. So I think the days of, tombs of spreadsheets and risk registers flying around the business are numbered, thankfully. And it's great for a finance leader, for him or herself to, of course, have a bit more time in the day job. That's a great benefit for them. But the real benefit here is they can actually drive the behaviors now. They have the tools and techniques and processes to drive the behaviors for the right ways, for the right reasons, rather, through technology. Secondhand news was a phrase that a CFO played out to me. He felt that he was constantly on the end of secondhand news that he couldn't validate for himself. The use of technology is now going to do with that. You get rid of that secondhand news and really act as a backstop for those finance and C-suite leaders. So I think, we're procurement practitioners by trade at Barker's. We want to deliver projects with our clients rather than for them. And it's really, really good to be talking about, we'll take you through a period of transformation, excuse me for using that phrase again, but we're also going to bring you tools and techniques and ways of working that will work for you for years to come. And I think VBG, Vanquis Banking Group, is a great example of that.
Yeah, and I think, as I said before, that passion really shows through. And I think that, when you're working with people that have got an idea of where they want to go as customers, and also working with partners who've got that shared vision, really makes a big difference. And I think it's that key of hearing secondhand news. I think that's definitely something that probably people on the webinar today can relate to, and I certainly don't want to be having to deal with something which is in the past. So Steve, cost controls and governance are major priorities for both finance and procurement leaders. How have you approached this as part of that transformation journey, and what impact has this had on compliance and strategy?
Yeah, so well, I never used the word transformation when I was doing everything that I had planned for the strategy, my 3-year strategy for the team. So I called it maturity. So we'll interchange maturity and transformation. But going back to where we were in 2020, we had 5 separate divisions with 5 separate general ledgers. They were on different systems. Every time I wanted to have a look at the supply base across the group, it took 2 to 3 weeks for my team to glue together all of the information, because it was all in different formats. It had to be manually adapted to be able to get a single view. So you could never have a true view because you were always looking backwards. It wasn't in a usable format. They came out in different formats. So you'd always then try and translate it and put it into Excel. Rogue spend was rife because 2 of the divisions didn't have purchase order systems. Suppliers were set up at will, so we had multiple thousands of suppliers that basically we didn't know what they were. They weren't being tiered, and we had no proper rigor or cost control or governance over any of it. So part of my strategy was, we need to fix that. We need a single pane of glass. We need some single systems. We need to be able to have MI at a touch of a button. I need to have visibility of supplier of all our suppliers quickly, and I need to see what they're spending, when they're spending, how they're spending. Basically, that meant that I needed a single P2P system, which after an RFP, we selected Coupa. Because they did everything that I needed to be able to get some governance around things. And then obviously I picked Barker's as the implementation partner, who did an amazing job. So we had a very tight timescale where we delivered 5 instances of Coupa in 6 months was one every month, and we just tipped over into the next month. Otherwise, it would have been 5 for 5. But we did that on time and on budget. So fair play to Barkers. But the best thing about delivering that was that in each time we delivered one, and it was January, February, March, April, May, and June. That basically every time we delivered one, that we had full visibility of the spend that was going underneath it. We implemented a no PO, no pay instantaneously. Suppliers couldn't get paid without a purchase order, which stopped all of the suppliers being set up at will. People that were setting up the suppliers still trying to go bypassing the procurement and the policies were then highlighted and then escalated to management. They were obviously advised of the framework, they're given a warning and then escalated up to make sure that everybody then started having a uniform approach to onboarding suppliers, notifying procurement, making sure we're following the right finance rules, and then everything started to get to PO. And then also as part of that process, when we were transitioning suppliers into Coupa, we forced them into the Coupa supplier portal, the CSP, and by doing that, and that was, I think Shane mentioned earlier about the automated PO flipping into invoicing. He describes it far better than me, but all I know is that it's automated, and what that happens has had a indirect impact on the accounts payable team that isn't in my team. But it meant that because that was fully automated, they had to do manual work, which freed up FTE time in that department. So there was a huge amount of benefits to delivering this system. So it was, and now we've got full visibility of all our suppliers. Everything is no PO, no pay. I got supplier spend at a touch of a button. It's a much better position than we were in 2020.
It sounds like you've gone through a good maturity program, and I think some of the key words there for on time and on budget. How many times are we actually able to say that? So it's a fantastic journey.
Not as the head of procurement, not often. So
not often. No,
so
exactly.
I was pleased that as the accountable exec of my project, it was on time and on budget. Thanks to Bart.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Steve.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, I mean, Matt, we've talked about compliance at the beginning of the conversation. Do you think that our compliance landscape is likely to get more complex in the future? And maybe if you could talk us through some new requirements that you might have heard coming up into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reflect on what Steve shared with us today, I think Steve characterizes how procurement's priorities have radically changed in the last 10 years, 15 years. Procurement teams are very much all about cost, taking cost out of suppliers. Now it's about risk, supplier onboarding, procurement maturity, ways of working. So procurement is very different to how it was. And on screen here are the latest set of priorities that procurement teams are going to have to contend with. Of course, we have the Procurement Act. It's suffered some delays, but it's going to come in next year, all being well. This is going to change how regulated industries, public sector industries, are going to have to procure and the framework in which they have to operate within. We have the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. That's all about combating economic crime by driving better qualities around identity verification, understanding who the directors and officers are, and really all trying to combat fraud and fraudulent practices, particularly in international supply chains and those within manufacturing, for example. Artificial intelligence, there might be a bit of an eye roll in the audience, but artificial intelligence, it is maturing. Colleagues from Coupa are an example of how AI is being leveraged to give some actual meaningful outcomes and some practical help. But it's a very, very unregulated world. Some would describe it as a bit like the Wild West at the moment. Unfortunately, we're now seeing actual regulation being introduced by the AI Safety Institute. So call out to procurement teams, it is a tool we're all going to be using more. And these are all new requirements you're going to have to build into your sourcing and supply management processes. And lastly, the same can be said for ESG. Lots and lots of good work by procurement teams on ESG, but I think we're all questioning, What's the standard? What's the metric? What's the base comparison? And how should we measure each other on this? There's going to be some more formalized ways of working that are driven through legislation, and hopefully get away and do away with this artistic license that is certainly pervading the ESG landscape at the moment. So really a call to action for all procurement and commercial colleagues on the line at the moment. These are going to impact you. Unfortunately, they are something else for you to have to do and manage as part of the day job. But 65% of our respondents to the survey are saying we don't have resource, we don't have technology, and really that's the key reason of why we're not hitting our strategic objectives. So anything that allows you to leverage technology, so you have one less thing to do and one less task to manage, is going to be a great thing for you. But I encourage you all to start thinking about this now.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're all, working in a more legislative future, and these are just some of them that are coming our way for procurement and finance teams.
Of course.
Shane, perhaps you can elaborate maybe on how some of Coupa's tools can help governance here. I mean, you've got these changes as legislation in front of us. What's Coupa doing to help people in this area?
Yeah, I think Steve definitely touched on a lot of it, and probably the first part would be that controlled purchasing. So, if you want to get a holistic view into your spend, the first thing you need to do is put controls in place around the purchase. So a lot of customers come to us and they're doing the approvals when the invoice comes in. That's after the fact, it's retrospective, and you just open yourself up to a lot of risk. So by putting those controls in place upfront around the PO, and that could be in the form of approval workflows, budget controls, even user permissions in terms of how they access the platform. And then you can get control around your spend. The second element of that would be compliant invoicing. So what Coupa does is really helps customers stay compliant with invoicing regulations across different regions that they're operating in. And maybe I would add a fifth trend to that slide would be a lot of the electronic invoicing mandates and regulations that we're seeing rolled out across different regions like Spain, France, China, Germany. And really what we do is we take the complexity out of staying compliant across multiple different regions by driving an electronic invoicing methodology with suppliers. And there's probably a lot of people on the webinar here that hear electronic invoicing. The first thing you think is my customers, my suppliers would never use that. But really, it works. And when we look at the benchmark across our customer base for electronic invoicing, it's 83.1%, which means that the best-in-class Coupa customers are doing 83.1% of their invoicing electronically.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to make a huge difference in the years ahead, and also in particular to those e-invoicing mandates that you mentioned. And I don't think that if you're on the webinar and thinking that well, I mostly deal in the UK, it probably heading our way to in the near future. Conscious of time, Steve, but maybe if you've got some thoughts on what you're seeing as some of the key trends coming up, and maybe what you see tech's role is in that as well, please.
Yeah, so I think integrating systems has become far easier over the last decade. If you tried to integrate systems a decade ago, it was really, really hard, but now you've got easier ways to integrate multiple systems. The fact that you can do this gives you faster and greater and wider visibility on data. You get wider data sets. I mean, that then makes it easier to form more robust strategies and gives you a better view on what's going on rather than having a siloed view here and another one over here. You can actually you can join all of this data together to get a much better view, to have to formulate, as you say, a more structured and robust strategy. And obviously, touched on it, AI. Obviously, it wouldn't be any kind of conference without somebody mentioning AI. So I know that I'm second to the table, but here's a real life example. So I'm still trying to find out whether AI will work in procurement. I've been to quite a few conferences. I'm not convinced I've seen anything that is going to be change the needle. However, my team has come to me and said that they're using my junior members of the team are using Microsoft Copilot. So when they're trying to communicate with C-suite executives, you know, as you communicate upwards, that's a skill that you learn as you go up the management chain. Actually, they're writing an email to say, you know, they need to communicate something, and they're going into Copilot and saying, please update or please change this so that it's directed to a C-suite executive, and it really updates it really well. I've been very impressed. So they're using stuff like Copilot to basically help them do emails and write tenders and stuff like that. So, you know, it's coming along.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, I think the beauty of AI enables us to think slightly differently about the way that we do our jobs. And I think that in the case that you just told us there, Steve, it's sometimes it's the younger people within our teams. They're using it. They're so used to it. But it's interesting to see how our worlds are going to be completely changed, I think, in the future. I think it's not necessarily going to happen today, tomorrow, but it's those changes are making themselves felt, and they, you know, procurement is going to be affected by it. Finance is going to be affected by it for sure. Shane, in maybe like 1 minute, if you could, what do you think? What do you see changing in the next sort of as we go into 2025, perhaps?
Yeah, I think very quickly, when we think of AI, most people think now of generative AI, you know, ChatGPT, for example. That's definitely one element of it. If we look at the wider applications of AI, Coupa's been doing it for some time. So when it comes to things like providing AI insights, you know, suggesting ways that you could better manage your spend, monitoring supply base for risk, monitoring your spend for fraudulent activity. Coupa's been doing those things for quite some time, but we're starting to build on those capabilities with recent feature releases like AI contract extraction. So these are real life, you know, value driving examples. But I would say the buzzword at the moment is definitely generative AI. It's a hot topic. So what Coupa is now doing is using generative AI throughout the platform. So that ChatGPT style assistant, which can assist with things like raising purchase requests, suggesting preferred suppliers, building out reports. So, you know, for example, show me all of my invoices due within the next 30 days. So just taking some of the manual work out of some of those tasks.
Yeah, and I think we spoke at the beginning about getting some better efficiencies into our processing, and I guess this is another way of being able to do that. We've talked about getting more controls of your processing as well, and I think that, as you say, that this is another way that we can help organizations enable that. So if you haven't asked a question yet and you want to, attendees, I mean, you can ask questions as well, you guys, if you want to. But if you haven't yet asked the question, as I said, there's a chat function there. We've got a couple of minutes to put any questions that you might have in there. You've heard all that Steve, Matt, and Shane have been talking about today, and I'm sure you've got some questions that you want to ask the guys. But first of all, Stephen, there's a question here for you. How important was it for the SI, in your case Barker's, to truly get and feel the pain of procurement challenges rather than just the, oh, I can't read the last bit, rather than just be system integrators?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's vital. So, you know, picking your implementation partner is probably one of the hard is almost more important than picking your software partner. Obviously, you've got to pick your software partner that's going to do it, but there's no point having something that's sat on a shelf that doesn't work or it's implemented badly. So your implementation partner, I would say, is more important than the software vendor. So picking the right one, you know, one of my ex-colleagues tried to implement a P2P system across the group before I was involved in this area. They picked an implementation partner. They did an okay job, but it was okay and it kind of worked, but it didn't solve the big the big problem. So you know, they did a okay job. When I went out to tender, where basically we looked at multiple vendors, you know, big, medium, small. I found that I had a much better rapport with Barker's, and Barker's really dug under the skin of trying to understand our business, so that actually they could help us and guide us and understand us, so that we could work together as true partners, as almost an extension of, they were an extension of a team. I think that two of my members of my team basically were with at least two members of their team solidly for 6 months on a couple of hours or more every single day to be able to get this project over the line. So it's incredibly important.
Yes, you need some, and it's interesting to hear you talk about them as being almost a part of your team. And I think you really need to have that kind of buy-in, don't you, and feel that they understand the business and understand some of those pain points, and ultimately understand where it is that you want to head to as well in the long run, what you're wanting to get out of it. And the fact, and I'm still hearing the on time, on budget as well in my mind, which is fantastic. Someone's asking, Stephen, do you mind me asking which ERP system you use?
We use Coda.
Okay, all right, fantastic. And then let's see, Shane, what is Cooper doing to address concerns with AI data?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. AI is maybe the buzz topic, but this is maybe the more important side of it. You should always be asking that question. You know, if a company is using AI, what are they doing with the data? Where are they getting the data, and what are they doing with it? So Coupa has actually built and continues to develop an AI ethical framework, and that prioritizes protecting customer data. So we would never train, what the framework outlines is, we will never train public AI models on customer data or process customer data on unauthorized third-party services. So, for example, your data can never land in the hands of another customer or a supplier, for example. That framework also outlines transparency and explainability of AI decisions. So how is the AI making certain decisions? It also talks about bias mitigation, etc., and some other things. So yeah, it's more and more important, especially as regulations around data privacy and AI usage become more and more stringent. Adhering to those ethical AI principles is going to help organizations to mitigate the legal risks and stay compliant. We do have, I'll mention quickly, we do have an ethical AI white paper available online as well, if anyone wants to find that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm sure guys can go in there and download that as well, because as you say, I mean, still we talk about AI and digitization itself, and even putting things, storing our data in the cloud. There are still organizations out there who have their concerns about that, and I think it's right that we address those and make sure that organizations and the people within our teams are able to access the kind of information that puts their minds at rest, and their organizations can make use of that information and technology without putting themselves at risk. One here perhaps for you, Matt. You've shared some examples of organizations who've made their transformations a success. However, others have struggled. What advice would you give organizations embarking on a tech journey, especially those operating in markets where regulation is tighter and more complex?
Understood. That's a really good question. I think it's very, very easy for people on the line to start thinking about what's our requirements, what's our workflows, almost getting into the nitty-gritty of what they're trying to change and dropping into solution mode. How do we write a tender? Who do we speak to? The first, and I would argue the most compelling factor internally, is what's in it for you personally. And that is to yourselves as procurement commercial professionals and your wider stakeholders. I think it's very easy to talk about a business case, the savings, the theoretical and conceptual ways of workings on the back of a digital transformation. But what's going to get people passionate and committed to a program is how is it going to actually change for them, and what is the pain you're going to do away with and get rid of by embarking on this digital transformation. That's when you will find you're surrounded in a room with people who are going, we are up for this and we're committed to this transformation. I believe that is the most key ingredient for success. And I've talked to it earlier on, leadership. I think once you've got that community of people who are passionate about the transformation, that you're going to take them on, you need a very, very strong leader to represent this program of work in the business and drive it forward. That military style way of working where you're one team going in a direction.
Thank you very much. That seems like a pretty good place to end the conversation today. I know we're right up on time, and in fact we're slightly over time, but I hope everybody on the webinar is okay with that. We've had a great conversation between everybody today, and I think, you know, yes, everybody on the webinar and their organisations, who doesn't want the pain of inefficiencies and errors to be taken away, and making sure that you're compliant and have some of those manual processes automated for you, so you can do some of those more complex and interesting areas of work as well. So thanks very much, guys, for joining. Thanks, Steve, Matt, and Shane. Been fantastic hearing your insights and your stories today. And I don't think we said the word transformation too much, did we? All right, take care, everybody, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.